بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. MashaAllah, it's so wonderful to see you all once again. As expected, we have a large sisters turnout. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. We're blessed to have Dr. Celene Ibrahim, alhamdulillah, this evening. And so we're going to, I don't want to talk too much, but as most of you know, she is a chaplain at Tufts. She just recently completed her doctorate and defended, alhamdulillah, and so she is a doctor. And also, she's going to be part of the Umrah trip, inshaAllah ta'ala. So, without further ado, فليتفضل.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وسيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. Jazakumullah khairan for coming out tonight. It's a pleasure to be here. I love all the energy running around in the back over there. MashaAllah, this masjid is clearly a beautiful place to be on a Friday night. When I grew up, my Friday family night tradition was roller skating. And as I'm looking back there, I think maybe ISBCC should get a floor and roll it out after Isha and do roller skating on Friday for the kids. Yusufi, take note wherever you are. Jazakumullah, on a serious note, thank you so much for being here, for spending your Friday night here. And you might realize that I'm a chaplain, and one of the questions that I get regularly as a chaplain is about relationships. And so part of this talk tonight, inshallah, will be a little bit of advice. And for people who are not married in the room, I think the advice will really resonate. And for people who are parents in the room who have children who are about the age where they might be thinking of marriage, or maybe past the age that you'd like them to be when they're thinking about marriage, this advice hopefully will also resonate. And anything that I say that is wrong and not useful, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive me for that and to put wisdom in all of our hearts. And the other theme that you'll see running through the story that I chose to talk about tonight is the theme of turning towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when we have no other hope left, and the small and large miracles that can happen when we're able to do that. So I'd like, as I'm talking about the story tonight, I don't want you to just think about it like a story. I want you to be thinking of the story of your life, and I want you to be thinking, as I will be with you, about what the lessons can be, how they can be applied to your life in particular. So I'm going to be asking you to think about incidents and times and ways you dealt with it and how it might apply to your lives going forward. So really engage with me in that bit, because the more you apply it to your own life, inshallah, the more benefit there'll be in this. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I'm sure that those of you who read the Quran realize that there's a lot in there about marriage. And a lot of it pertains to the rules and what husbands and wives should and should not do. And some of it pertains to the way husbands and wives interact with one another. And there's one story in the Quran in particular where we actually see a woman and a man coming together in marriage. And so if you are familiar with Surah Al-Qasas, so it comes right after Surah Al-Naml. So we've seen already in Surah Al-Naml the Queen of Sheba, Malikat Saba, who is this very powerful and competent and capable woman. And now coming into Surah Al-Qasas, and feel free to, is it up here? Yes. So feel free if you'd like to follow along. I don't know if the Arabic is on here as well, but I don't mind if you pull out your phones. I'm just going to be assuming that you are following along with Surah Al-Qasas with me. Let's move this a little closer. Okay. So I was just saying, if you'd like to follow along in the Arabic, I don't mind if you pull out your telephones and follow along in Surah Al-Qasas. But as I was saying, in Surah Al-Naml, right before Surah Al-Qasas, we've seen a powerful woman. We've seen Malikat Saba, and we've seen how she takes her entire nation and takes herself into Islam. And we don't know for certain in the story, but we can assume that her leadership then has ripple effects in her nation as well. And so now we're going to see in this surah another quite interesting woman figure, two of the sisters from Madyan. And we're going to see how this particular woman is assertive in the most beautiful way. And we're going to take a look at what is that balance between being assertive and then also holding respect for the family structures and a level of modesty. And if you look on the screens over here, the story part of it that I want to cover begins when Musa alayhi salam accidentally slays a man. And of course we see that he then, despite being the adopted son of the prince, the king, and having a high status, he is in serious trouble. Still no? Let's try this one. One of these might be better. Hello? Can someone help with the tech? Is it echoey for you all? Maybe I can turn it up. Bismillah. Can someone just let the office know? Because I think it has to change channels or something in order to be able to work. Or someone. Just hold it, push and hold it. Green? Hey, someone. No, it's still not. Maybe someone from the office. Yeah. All right, while you're waiting for me, I'm going to talk right into this, so hopefully it's a bit better here. And while we're waiting for someone to see if we can switch to a different microphone, I want you to sit with your neighbor, with the person across from you. And in this particular surah that we're looking at, Musa is described by one of the women in Madyan with two adjectives. And those of you who know the surah know what those adjectives are, but they are the strong and the trustworthy. And so just with your partner next to you, I'm curious, if you were to describe yourself with just two adjectives, what would those two adjectives be? And then, if you were to describe yourself, for those of you who don't have spouses yet, to a potential spouse, what would those two qualities be that you would describe yourself with? And then I want you to think about the qualities you would describe yourself with, and then think about the qualities your parents say or your siblings would describe you with. And I'd be curious to see if they match. And in the meantime, I'm going to try to get this a little bit better here. If I talk into it, does that help? Okay, I just hear an echo, so it's a little odd, but I'll talk right into it. Okay. All right, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So if you look over here, we have Musa has just slayed the man and is now leaving in a hurry. And so you'll see that he turns his face in the direction of Madyan. And I want you to apply this to your lives and think, for those of you who had major transitions in your life, hopefully no one here killed someone and had to run out of town, But think about the other transitions that you've had in your life. How many times have you maybe taken a job and had to kind of turn yourself to a completely new place? Or, maybe you've moved to a new neighborhood and it felt like that kind of complete uprooting. And think about in those moments the sense of insecurity that you might have felt, thinking, what is my future? What is going to be next for me? And if you'll see, let's follow along here. One thing I just want to point out, because it will come later here, you see this beautiful dua that Musa makes here. My Lord, Rabbi, nijani min al-qawm al-zalimin. Save me from the wrongdoing people. And so many times I find myself in situations where I feel like I need to make this dua. And I don't know if you've ever been in situations like this, but before we flip through it, I just wanted to point out this particular dua, because it actually comes back, that we'll see a little bit later, this particular dua exactly, like word for word, becomes answered. So I just wanted to point that out before we go on. Okay. So here's another, this surah is filled with beautiful dua of Musa. And so he says, my Lord, guide me to the right way. And here, sawa as-sabil is the words for right way here. And so when we pray the Fatiha, we pray, guide us to the straight path. And this is another way of saying the straight path, sawa as-sabil. And just, as you're going through this, mark this as a dua that is very good to memorize, for in general, but particularly when you are uprooting or when there's uncertainty in your life or when you're heading for a major transition. We can look to the example of Musa alayhi salam here and pray this particular dua. And interestingly, remember, here he has not yet received the call to prophecy, right? He has not yet received the verses of the Torah. He's not yet encountered Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaking from the bush. So he's very much here in this state of not knowing what is next. And I wanted to, having worked with a lot of college students, I know many times students in particular are in that place of not knowing what is next in life. And so, whether we're literally in a place of not knowing where we're going to be next, or in this place of not knowing what the next steps are, this is sometimes one of the most fruitful times for us spiritually, because it's one of those times when we're the most open to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's guidance. If we get into our routines every day and we're living and everything is familiar and we don't feel that sense of insecurity and that sense of what's next, sometimes everything becomes rote. But here, when we're in this place of total and utter need, Musa has now lost the only place that he knows, and he's going out into the desert trying to find some form of aid or support and trying to figure out what's next. So here's when our story really begins. And so Madyan, if I wish I had a map up here, but it's kind of towards if you're looking at the map, it's a little bit towards the east of where Musa was. So he's headed out into the desert. And if you can imagine traveling through the desert, I know some of us have done it, but maybe on air-conditioned buses. But imagine here, he's just running through the desert at this point, apparently. I mean, who knows if he even has a riding animal. And so he finally reaches the waters of Madyan, and he finds this watering hole, because of course, where are you going to go if you've just been walking in the desert? You're going to go to the watering hole. So it makes sense that this is where he's gone. And he finds there these flocks that are being watered as well. And then he finds there the two women keeping their flocks back. And interestingly, he's just come out of the desert here, but he comes with this sense of wanting to help. Clearly, he wants to know why they're standing there waiting. And for us in our lives, oftentimes I know personally, I'm so concerned with my own things If I were wandering through the desert and in need of water, I'm not sure I would really look around and say, oh, is there someone else I could help right now? But subhanAllah, I want you to think of these times in your life, or maybe right now in your life there's someone who is really like reaching out and needing help and needing attention, and for whatever reason, maybe we haven't yet noticed that they're standing there, that they're waiting on something that we could potentially provide them help with. So if there's anybody like that in your life, make an intention now, inshallah, to connect with them and to offer them the help, kind of no matter what else is going on in our lives. I want to point out how he said, what is the matter with you two? And in the Arabic, it does come off a little bit kind of a little abrupt, perhaps we could call it, but I guess we'll give him, he has been wandering in the desert, and he's right down to business. He's not, I think what it communicates to me is he's not coming up to them with the intention of flirting with two women at the watering hole, a'udhu billah. He's coming up to them asking, clearly you have an issue, what is your issue? And they said, we can't water our flocks until the shepherds take theirs away, and they say, our father is a very old man, Sheikh Kabir. And so from this, they answer very, matter-of-factly. So they don't actually ask him for direct help, notably, but they do kind of let him know the situation and let him know that they're, why they're waiting. Now, from this, I think there's a beautiful lesson here. So here you have two women in the Quran who are working, right? And they're out doing this very manual labor. They're out doing this labor that, from this story at least, you would say, oh, well, that seems like it's typically a man's job. But here we have two women doing it, and they're doing it perhaps out of necessity, but also because they're taking care of their father, they're taking care of the circumstances of their house, they're taking care of a need here. So for me, when I read this and I look at it and I think about how to apply it to today's circumstances, I know that many of us work and many of the women, are pursuing careers and are kind of contributing to their family. And so as I look at these verses, I see here kind of evidence of that happening. Now, if we take this, let's say, to an office place today, and we think about oftentimes there's a circle of like male privilege in the office, and the men sometimes get the promotions and get the this and get the that, and oftentimes women are kind of standing back going, hi, I'm here, I need my way to the watering hole as well. So this is a message for the women in the room and a message for the men in the room to think like, in what ways are we not recognizing one another's needs, specifically when it comes to women who are doing this really valuable work of, taking care of their families and taking care of the business of their households. And so this makes me wonder here, like it takes a guy coming through the desert, like traveling, like, he is a fugitive, really, and he shows up. And, none of the other guys in Madyan, like, what's wrong with these men in Madyan? They don't, like, have the common courtesy to, like, let the women have a path through. And so, I gave the example of a workplace here, but we could also think about it in terms of many other settings where, like, women, we don't necessarily want to, like, have to elbow our way through things. And so that chivalry, as it's been called, but it's still relevant, it's still needed in our world, it's still appreciated. And so this to me is a perfect illustration of kind of the ignorance when we don't kind of take into account the whole situation and notice who might be there who just needs a little bit of a path forward. And this is the case, this example, it rests on gender relations, but we could imagine many other instances where there's some type of privileged group and they're kind of hoarding the resources, in this case the water, and there's people who are standing at the sides who for whatever reason can't get to the middle. And so, it's our job as Muslims, inshallah, to take account of all of those people who are around and make sure that we have both the common courtesy, but even sometimes more than common courtesy, like the active effort to make a place for the people who are pushed to the margins for whatever reason they are. So I think that's a beautiful lesson that's kind of embedded in these particular verses. So here we see that Musa did indeed take care of them. And you notice here, he takes care of them, and he's not then kind of hanging around, kind of saying, well, I just did a favor for you, now what's in it for me? He doesn't even ask. He's hungry, he has so many needs, he doesn't have anything, and he helps people, and then he turns around, and who does he turn to? Like, he turns to the shade. And here, we can think about it on different levels, like, literally, it's hot, he needs to rest from the sun, so he chooses the shade. But in another sense, he's turning towards Allah's shade. Like, who gives the best of shade? Like, in this world and in the hereafter, inshallah. And may Allah save us from the terrors of the Day of Judgment. Like, he's turning both literally and figuratively to the shade of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And look at this dua. Like, if you take one dua from tonight, this is the most beautiful. I always say this verse is my favorite Quranic verse. This verse is my favorite. So I say it in that sense. This is one of my favorite Quranic dua. My Lord, I'm in dire need of whatever good thing you may send me. And the word in Arabic that the Quran uses, that Musa uses, is faqir. And the faqir is literally the person who is poor, but it's also the person who is poor in that sense that they have emptied themselves of the world and all worldly longing, so that they're only turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the substance. And this is when we all know that, like, when we turn to Allah and walk towards Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes running towards us. And so it's in these particular circumstances, he's just helped someone, and then instead of looking to the world, instead of looking to that person for a reward, he's turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, saying, not, by the way, Allah, I just helped someone, like, where's my reward? But saying, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I am poor, and I'm in need of whatever little good thing that you could give me. So this is a beautiful dua to pray, in the middle of the night, or in those quiet times, or just in those states. I know many of us have been in states when we're not sure what the path ahead is, and we're sort of in that state all the time, right? We don't really ever know what the path ahead is, but this dua in particular is incredibly powerful. And the Quran, I think, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes a point, because the very next ayah is an answer to that dua. And I hope and pray that this happens to you frequently. It happens to me on occasion when you make a dua and then, like, the response is so instantaneous, it kind of gives you chills. So Musa alayhi salam gets the response, and he gets it in the form of this woman who then comes to him offering, to bring him back into her father's home. And you'll notice here that one of the two women, and I find this very interesting, because the Quran never, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not ever say, which woman is which. So eventually we know he ends up marrying one of these women. But we never know, is it the one who walks to him here? Is it the one who kind of advocates for him to her father? We never know any of these things. And to me, I always wondered, well, why is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't tell us, or doesn't make it specific which woman it is? And maybe it's to kind of make that aura of modesty around the situation, perhaps. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud why that would potentially be. But the woman, when she approaches, she walks with hayat, with the modesty. And interestingly to me, just like we thought about the shade as both literal and metaphorical, we can think about her walking modestly. We get an image of maybe what it looks like to walk modestly versus not. But we know too that, like, modesty is a characteristic, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said that it's the defining characteristic of Islam. So here I find it so incredibly beautiful that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the defining characteristic of Islam, uses that characteristic here to describe this woman. So it's obviously clear from this that she's very, righteous. Like, not only is she taking care of her aging father and the affairs of the house, but her inside, her character is very beautiful too. So I think beyond getting a picture in our minds of a particular way of walking, we can take that into a metaphorical sense and say, well, what does it mean to walk with modesty in our lives, through our lives? Like, what does it mean to embody that value and that virtue? And it's something I think about a lot, and you might all come to different answers, where you are in your life, how to more imbibe this sense of modesty. And it's obviously not just a female thing. I mean, here it's ascribed to a female, but if it's the defining virtue of Islam, it's obviously across the board here. So I encourage you all to think, like, what would that mean to walk with modesty, like this woman does here. So Musa comes to the father. Now notice here, he trusts. He's not like, I just asked for a sign. Is that a sign? I'm not sure if that's a sign. Like, is that an answer to my dua? Maybe not. I sometimes people will come to me and they'll say, I prayed on it and then this happened, and it'll be so clear to me, like, well, that is a pretty clear indication that that's your sign. Like, follow that thing. So Musa, does it. He understands that this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this beautiful thing, this sign. So he doesn't say, oh, no thanks, I'm waiting for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do something for me. He recognizes that this is the sabil, that this is the path that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is providing for him. So now you notice here, he tells the story to the old man, to the old sheikh, the father, and he says, do not be afraid, you're safe now from a people who do wrong. And remember a few slides back when I said, remember this dua where he prays to be saved from the wrongdoing people? And now, he's just had one dua answered, and that dua was answered immediately in the next ayah. But by the way, his dua from like 5 ayahs ago is also answered right here. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala works that way sometimes, right? Like sometimes the answers are instantaneous, sometimes they're kind of along the way. Sometimes we might not even realize that one of our dua was answered until we kind of think back on the way things unfolded. So here's it's a beautiful, again, an affirmation that when we're in that sense of deprivation, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just makes things happen. And by the way, Musa's in this state because he accidentally killed a person. So we can think about, times in our life where maybe we've done something we're not incredibly proud of. And, some people run away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in those times because of shame, because of all different things. But actually, if we look at this story closely, this is telling us, yes, we make mistakes. Yes, we do things that we'd rather not have done. But actually, sometimes those are the times when we're the most able to be guided. So this story is also kind of a story of redemption in that way as well. Now here's one of my favorite lines in the Quran, and I say this about like thousands of ayahs, so take it on that, but this is really a very beautiful line. So one of the women says, and again, we don't know which one, we don't know if it's the one who was walking to the water hole, we don't know if it's her sister maybe. Says, Father, hire him. It's a pretty direct command, right? So she's really investing herself in this situation. And then she gives a reason. So she gives the command first, the imperative first, and then gives her rationale. She says, the best you can hire is the strong and the trustworthy. القوي المتين. القوي الأمين. And so if you remember a few minutes ago, I asked you to think about, what two characteristics would you describe yourself with, or what two characteristics would other people in your life describe you with? But these are two incredibly beautiful characteristics, and the reasons I think they're nice is that they play on the same idea that we've been looking at throughout the surah, where they can be read very literally. Like, he's a pretty strong guy. Like, he can handle the flux. Like, he's like, he's well built. But, strength, qawi, is on so many different levels. Like, we can be, just like we saw the walking modesty, with modesty, how are we strong in our lives? In what way do we manifest this quality that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put into the human being? And we may manifest it in our physical lives, like we may be able to pick up a lot of stuff or like lift a lot of weight or something. But here, maybe she's looking at something deeper. Maybe she sees strength in the sense that, courage or strong of faith or strong of character. Or, think of all the different ways that people can be strong. And, to take it for a second and to apply it to our own lives. In what areas of our own lives are we strong? Like literally, in our inner lives, in our character. And then, the harder part of that is in what areas are we weak? And where do we actually need to work on strengthening? And how can we make it so that when someone sees us and someone encounters us and just in one brief transaction can say, oh, that person is strong. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us strong and make us, healthy in body and healthy in iman and, establish us on the right way. And then the other characteristic, which is so beautiful, the amin, the trustworthy. So right away, she's able to distinguish these characteristics in Musa alayhi salam. And trustworthy is a beautiful one as well, because trustworthy is like literally you can trust someone with your things. If you give them a task to do, they can accomplish it. But also trustworthy in the sense that they won't hurt you. They won't harm you, not only on a physical level, but on the spiritual, on the emotional level. And so what does that, in what ways in our lives are we, trustworthy? Like, are we showing that in our relationships? Where have we failed? Where have we maybe hurt people who entrusted us with their spiritual well-being or their well-being in another sense? So, may Allah make us people who are trustworthy, who are able to keep our promises, who are able to keep our word when we promise something. I think in particular, I think a lot about being a parent and how can I be a parent for whom my daughter can put her trust in, that I'm guiding her on the right way, or that she can depend on me for things. So, in particular, I pray for all the parents in the room that we could really be trustworthy for especially those young people in our lives. But many of us mentor, and how can we be trustworthy in that sense? And in the sense that's given here, how could we be trustworthy in a business relationship? What does that mean? Would our employers say this is a trustworthy person when they describe us? And if not, what do we have to fix about ourselves to make that the case? All the ayah of the Quran ask us to think about something about ourselves and our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So also here, are we with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Are we fulfilling our duties with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks into our hearts, would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala see this characteristic? May Allah make us all of the trustworthy and establishing men in our hearts. One more thing about that last verse. Notice the subtle cues going on. You could read it and say, oh, she's concerned about her father's business and she really wants him to get this particular good employee. But, I kind of read between the lines a little bit and say she has other interests involved. Or maybe it's not her. Maybe she's advocating for her sister who has, expressed an interest. Or who knows what has happened. We can't speculate too much here. But clearly she's like on this level with her father where he kind of gets what she's saying, I think, because, the very next line is, I'd like to marry you. He doesn't say, I'd like to hire you, right? So she says, I'd like, hire him, and he says, how would I marry him? So I think he gets it, is the short of it. And, I pray that all of our, parent connections, and particularly our daughter-father connections can be strong like that, because sometimes it's hard to say things explicitly, right? But you need to have that type of relationship where you don't necessarily have to say things explicitly, and parents can pick up on it. And may Allah forgive me if I'm reading this in the wrong way, but I think if you're just looking at it from a literary perspective, perhaps you'd say it's kind of clear what she was hinting at. And it's interesting how he again responds with this, I'd like to marry you to one of these daughters of mine. And it might be to kind of protect the modesty of the situation, and I don't know. I don't have the wisdom to know why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would never kind of specify which of the two daughters is going on, but we see that again. And what does the father say here as well? On one condition. There's always a condition, isn't there? Those of us who have had to introduce potential spouses to parents, there's always a condition, right? So on the one condition that you serve me for 8 years. So here's the hiring part. So he does actually take the advice to hire him too. But this is a beautiful quality of parenting too. So it's his responsibility to ensure the welfare of his daughter. And on the one hand, here's a strong and trustworthy man who has just come into town. But on the other hand, he's kind of hedging his bets a little bit and saying, I need my daughter to stay close and just to make sure this whole relationship thing works out. And here I think there's this wisdom. And so for those of us who are parents in the room, or for those of us who have, are in this process perhaps of negotiating with our parents a suitable spouse, there's a type of give and take and this recognition between the needs of the couple and then the needs of the parents involved. And so we see here in the Quran this beautiful model of a son-in-law understanding the needs of the father-in-law, and having this relationship that says, yes, I'm not just interested in your daughter, but I'm interested in your family and your enterprise and your, I am willing to serve you as my father-in-law. I think I've had the opportunity to watch a lot of Egyptian kind of cinema and things, and it's always kind of focused on the mother-in-law figure and like the daughter serving the mother-in-law figure. But here in the Quran, subhanAllah, we have this example of a son-in-law serving the father-in-law. And I've noted in the Quran all these different relationships that there are between parents and children, and adopted parents and adopted children, and we have examples of good parents and bad parents and all kinds of things. And right here in the Quran is our example of this son-in-law, father-in-law relationship that's really quite beautiful. And you see that it's a negotiation. There's a sort of realism in what's presented here, because they're both, they both have their interests. And we see as the ayah goes on, the father-in-law says, I don't intend to make things difficult for you. Now, often that's the perception, right? Like, why are you placing all of these demands and another demand and another demand and another demand? And an interesting thing here is that he just has one simple demand. Like, this is the most important thing to me. And doesn't make this whole laundry list that's absolutely impossible to fill. I mean, it's a substantial ask, right? He's asking for 8 years of the man's life. Like, that's pretty substantial. But then when he agrees to it, he doesn't go on and add another condition. Oh yeah, by the way, and oh yeah, by the way, and oh yeah, by the way. And I don't know if any of you have had that situation happen in your own lives, but I've seen it as a chaplain where, there's a demand, and then the couple, negotiates that demand, and then there's another demand, and then there's another demand, and they just keep piling up. So, from this lesson in the Quran, as parents, we can take away, like, look, decide what is the most important thing, and, be clear about that from the beginning, and, be flexible and communicate that you're doing this because of, your own sense of caretaking over your child. But, be fair. Do you see how it's God willing, you will find that I'm fair. So I find that incredibly beautiful. So then Musa says, let that agreement between us. And he says here, whatever of the two terms I fill. So, he's also hedging his bets and saying, look, if I don't stay, the commentators say it's 10 years is the longer period. If I don't stay 10 years, like, don't take it personally, okay? So it's this beautiful negotiation that we have here. And with Allah as a witness to what we say. So let me go back here. I just want to say one more thing. As people who are looking for spouses as well, I want to stress here how fast the whole relationships transpires. We don't have any bits about the daughter kind of making a secret relationship with Musa or any of that business. And I just want to stress that making this decision about who we're going to marry, it's incredibly scary and it's incredibly difficult, and sometimes it's maybe the biggest single most important decision that we can make in our lives. And sometimes I see that couples will kind of find somebody and then maybe keep it secret for a while and not kind of pursue it through these legitimate means. And so I just wanted to kind of make the point that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives this example. And, on the one hand, this couple doesn't know each other for very long, but they do know one thing about each other. They know that they have good character. And so you'll notice here that you'll notice that the father doesn't say, "Oh wait, Musa alayhi salam, you're not from Madyan, you're not one of our tribe, you're not," doesn't place these wrong types of conditions on Musa alayhi salam. And I know I see this as well. Families who maybe, some of us have found good and righteous potential spouses, and our parents don't have any issue with the character of the person, but maybe they have an issue with the occupation of the person, or an issue with the race of the person, or the ethnicity, or the nationality, or all of this. And I ask, wisdom for all of our parents, and wisdom and patience for all of the young people in the room who might be in this type of situation. But, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam reiterate over and over again that it's the character that will make the match between the two. And so if we found people who we know to be of good character, and there's no reason to necessarily delay and push off, bring that person and have they're difficult conversations. Even in the Quran here, it's a negotiation, and they're hard, but it's kind of our responsibility to bring these types of relationships into the open when we know they're good ones. And if we're in a relationship and we see a sign that the person's character isn't on par, then just stop the relationship, break it off. That can be painful, but it's better than kind of dragging something on when you know the person doesn't have a character. And if you yourself know you don't have a good character, well, this is a good reminder, and we're all working on our character. Finally, and then we'll open it up for some kind of questions and answer and discussion here. Yeah, I think that's actually all I had, inshallah, based on my notes. But are there particular thoughts that you're having as you hear me talk? Any questions that you have about this particular story? Any questions you have about life and negotiating these types of relationships, and how to figure out if someone has a good character, and how to make this leap of faith in terms of accepting or making a marriage proposal, or going to talk to someone's parents, or anything from practical questions for how do you think is the best way to do this? And I don't have all the answers, but I've seen a lot of relationships, particularly in the role as chaplain, so I can tell you what I've seen, and maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us good wisdom. And if you'd rather not ask a question out loud, certainly feel free to write it, or if you don't like to talk but you have a friend who can talk better, that's fine too. Sure if it's on, but no, not on. Well, this one's out of battery, so I don't think that one's gonna work. But do Thank you all for your patience. I'm just going to try to summarize because it's a beautiful point here. So you'll see when we go back this way. You see that Musa, before reaching this point, he faced a lot of trials and had, a lot of situations in which, he was fearful. And so when he comes, he finds in the man here, and I should say that we don't know the identity of this particular man. Some of the commentators say it's Shu'aib, the Prophet Shu'aib alayhi salam, because Shu'aib is also mentioned as being in Madyan. The Quran doesn't make that connection explicit, but you do find it in the tafsir literature. But in any case, we know that this man is very wise, and one of the reasons that, as Sister Naima was saying, that we know he's very wise is because he listens to the full story before making any type of judgment. So on the one hand, you have here this fugitive who probably doesn't present so wonderfully after walking in the desert and facing all of these obstacles and things. But the man has wisdom to be able to listen to the full story. And the Quran makes that point. It says Moses came to him and told him the qasas. And interestingly, the name of the surah is obviously Surah Al-Qasas. And so it's the story of Musa, but we also see here Musa is telling his life story to this man. And so, maybe for the parents in the room, it's also, generally it's a good point of wisdom that, we don't know who people are until we take the time to let them tell us our stories and to listen to their stories. But also in terms of this man listening to Musa, he didn't judge him right away, but searched for the character in who he was and was able to make a judgment based on this full picture. Yeah. Other thoughts in the room? Thank you. I'm sorry we don't have a microphone. If there's one that works, it would be lovely to have it. Yeah, so how do you know when you're looking for a person? How do you know that they're going to match on a personality level, and how do you know that a person would actually be kind of good for you, or sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it that the thing that you most need to work on, oftentimes if there's a partner who has that strength in them, that can kind of often be nice because there's a type of balancing out that happens. I'll give the example of myself, for instance. I'm very public facing and super extroverted, and so I found a spouse who actually kind of tends to balance that aspect of me out a little bit. Or sometimes, it's not always the case, but sometimes there's a certain way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala causes us as well to grow by putting us with someone who causes us to reshape our character a little bit. So, I can think of other examples where certain of my character traits that I needed to develop, I actually, look to my partner in life and say, wow, mashallah, you have these characteristics really developed, and I'm going to learn them from you by spending time with you and seeing how you do this. And we can't expect, we're not perfect people, right? And we can't expect to find a perfect person. So oftentimes what I tell people is, do you know the worst parts of yourself? And can you tell them to somebody else? And do they find them endearing enough to want to deal with them for the rest of their lives, potentially? So it's not always about finding this perfect match, but it's about knowing ourselves well enough to be able to communicate our own growing edges. And I'll tell you just a very quick personal story. I met my hubby in a very odd circumstances on a street corner when we were both just kind of passing ways, kind of a little bit like this incident here. And after about a week or so of just getting to know him just a little bit, I said to him, so do you he would probably be horrified if he heard me telling the story, but I said to him, so do you like me? And he kind of gave me this really objective reading, like, well, here are your good characteristics, and there's like 3 like really annoying characteristics, but I might be able to deal with them. And so for me, like, I saw in that like an honesty. I'm like, wow, okay, this guy's pretty honest. And but that takes a level of like, being able to know someone else, and also like know ourselves enough to understand psychology, and understand why people do certain things, or what are the strengths and what are the our own weaknesses and their weaknesses. And so it's about that. And it's hard to have those conversations. You're like, hi, I met you a week ago, and by the way, like, I'm really impatient, and like, I leave dirty dishes in the sink, but if you can deal with that, I'm okay. So whatever it is that we're working on, I mean, some of the things we can really work on and fix, and some of those things are more like long-term projects that we need a little bit of, partner support to be able to treat. Other thoughts from over this way? That's a great question. So the question is, like, what are the types of questions that you can kind of ask to really get to who a person is? And so from this story, we see one thing is just watching the actions, right? Because we could talk all we want about how wonderful we are and how well we're going to take care of a family, but, what are we doing in life right now? And simple things, right? This is not a huge thing, but he just, help them water their flock, like so simple. So what are we doing on this basis? But then actually when we go to have these conversations, one question that I personally, if I sit with couples and they're like thinking like, oh, we might be right for each other, one of the questions I like to ask is, can you describe like your ideal day? Like, what does it look like? And if the person's, we have so many needs in life, and oftentimes in marriage, you have to decide, well, who's washing the dishes? Who's taking out the garbage? Who's doing all of these like really ordinary tasks? And sometimes we, because of the way we're acculturated here, maybe kind of think of marriage just in the terms of like fulfillment of a bond and a connection, and it's all of that too, but you're running an enterprise together. Like, the family is an enterprise. Okay, so if you both have aspirations for career, I mean, what do you have aspirations for raising a family, and what does that look like, and where are your values? So I find those types of questions really useful, because people, because of the way they're raised, because of their personalities, have all different expectations for what they're looking for in a spouse. They have ideas about what it means to be a wife, or what they're looking for in a wife, or their mother did it a certain way, and so this is the way they want a spouse to do it. And some of those things only get teased out when you start talking about like the nitty gritty of things. I always encourage people to think about this, because we're so acculturated to think in terms of like jobs and professions. So I say to people, think about it like you are an HR department. You have an open position in life. It's called like life partner. What are you looking for? What benefits are you providing? And to have some clarity around that, I think is really helpful. And I mean, even if it takes you between yourself, like writing this down and trying to really tease it out, oftentimes, this is probably one of the most important decisions you'll make, and give it that same rigor. We study for our professional exams for like months, right? We put a lot of work and effort into that, and we can approach this with a similar type of thought. And I love it because the woman here she advocates for herself. She takes that step and in an appropriate way kind of takes the initiative. And I think sometimes we're cultured to think that modesty does not mean, making a kind of overture when we found someone that we think meets our conception of who would be a good life partner. And here, subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah gives us a woman who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes as modest, also making this overture and starting the relationship. So to me, this is a very clear sign that this is, not only okay, but meritorious to advocate for ourselves in this kind of way. Are there other thoughts from this side of the room? They can be like unformed, like this is part of the beauty of having times like this is because we all come with our kind of questions and our insecurities and our our areas of being unsure. So, it doesn't have to be perfectly articulated with a thesis and supporting details. And it could just be what's on your mind and what's on your heart. So did you give some thought to what people would describe you with if they just met you? Depends if they met you on one of your good days or one of the bad days. Any other questions? And if not, maybe we can make some closing dua and wrap up. And I'll hang out up here if there's other questions that people want to ask. But oftentimes if you have a question, other people have it, so it's okay to ask. All right, we'll just close with some closing dua. And if there's particular issues that are on your life and your heart, we have a story here of dua being answered. So take this moment and inshallah articulate them. And Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, I ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala purify our hearts and purify our character and make us of service to people and make us of the kind who don't look for the worldly reward but look for the reward in the hereafter and in terms of Allah's pleasure. Allahumma thabbit qulubana ala dinika. Make our hearts, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, firm on your deen. Give us a purity of intention for those of us who are looking for life partners. Ease that and put sincerity in our hearts and give us the people who will help us on your deen and help us find the sabil and the path forward and the way to true success in life. Ya Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for those of us who are in relationships, make those relationships the coolness of our eyes, put mercy in them, make our hearts open to our spouses and to the needs of our spouses. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put all of us who are parents on the right path so that we may lead our children on the right path. When there are difficult conversations that need to happen, Ya Allah, put mercy in those conversations. Help us not ever shy from making the difficult decisions in life when you've made the circumstances for us. May we see your ayat and may you answer our dua. Ya Allah, you're the mujib ad-dua, answer our dua. Ya Allah, we come to you lost and with so many insecurities and so many needs. Ya Allah, our hearts are poor for you. Enrich us from your bounties, Ya Mughni. Ya Allah, we ask that you make our families strong and make our relationships trustworthy. Make our hearts firm and strong on your deen. Ya Allah, Ya Qawi, Ya Mateen, Ya Ameen. ثبت قلوبنا على دينك وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين صلى الله عليه وسلم آمين يا رب العالمين. Jazakum Allah khairan. I pray that there's benefit and may Allah forgive me for any mistakes and may Allah set up